Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us in the different parts of the world. And welcome to the World Data Forum. In this session, we're going to be talking about accelerating the uptake of mobile big data and artificial intelligence services through public-private partnerships. Hello and welcome. Greetings from Pretoria, South Africa. My name is Rachel Sibande, and I'll be co-hosting this session together with my colleague, Moita from the GSMA. I am Senior Director at the Digital Impact Alliance of the United Nations Foundation. This session is co-hosted by the Digital Impact Alliance in partnership with our colleagues at the GSMA. Now, in this session, just to take you through the agenda, we will be highlighting some examples and perspectives of public and private sector initiatives that are shaping the market. We have a dynamic group of data for development thought leaders. We'll start off with a fireside conversation with Dr. Salamao David from the Mozambican Regulatory Authority. And then thereafter, we're going to have a panel conversation with colleagues Rachel Bevan and Christopher Ahen from FCDO and Telia, respectively. We'll wrap it up with a round of question and answer. And finally, my colleague Moita is going to close the session with closing remarks. Now, as the Digital Impact Alliance, we have for the past 5 years been testing out mobile data for development models. We are a think, do, replicate tank. Now, over the last 5 years, we've supported the deployment of mobile data for development models in over 9 countries, including Malawi, Mozambique, who we're going to hear from today, and Tanzania, just to mention a few. We've supported the deployment of mobile data for development models across 3 major use cases, which are health, inclusive of the COVID-19 risk and epidemiological models, a food security use case, and in disaster management. Now, the Digital Impact Alliance has also invested in open source technology tools for analyzing mobile network operator data through technical partners such as FlowMinder and Opal. At DIAL, we have also delivered a wealth of resources such as research papers and a mobile data for development handbook to guide other practitioners seeking to deploy mobile data for development initiatives elsewhere. We believe that after these 5 years of demonstrating use of mobile data for diverse development use cases at country level, there are many lessons, best practices, and models that can be replicated and scaled for ultimate routine use of data for decision making. Now, such replication can only happen if we learn from how the business and partnership models were built to succeed and also where they actually failed so that we could do better. Now, having said that, I want us to dive in straight into our first fireside chat conversation. This will be a conversation with Dr. Salamao David from the Mozambican Regulatory Authority, also called INCM. Now, Dr. David will be sharing his perspectives on how the regulator there has championed the use of data for disaster management and their aspirations for the future. We hope that this discussion can motivate other regulators, mobile network operators, and ecosystem players to seek to deploy data for development models. And welcome once again. We're going to be talking to Dr. Salamao David, who is Head of Research and Development from the Mozambican Regulatory Authority, also called INCM. Dr. David, welcome to this session.
Greetings, Rachel. My name is Salamao David. I am the Head of Research and Development at the Communications Regulatory Authority of Mozambique. which regulates the postal and communication sector in Mozambique. Rachel and everyone, thank you for having us in this session.
Thank you. Thank you. And as you know, in this session, we're really trying to learn more on how to enhance public-private partnerships towards utilization of mobile data for development, big data, and artificial intelligence. And so first things first, would like to hear from you, your perspectives from Mozambique on how the regulatory authority has been championing use of mobile data for development in recent years.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you for your question. As you are aware, we regulate the communication and postal sector. For many years, for regulatory purposes, we have been receiving CDR data for all MNOs in Mozambique. We have got presently 3 MNOs, and we get this data on a daily basis. Mobile telecommunications is a widespread service in Mozambique. Some people might not even have a TV, but they have got a mobile phone. Some families might not even have a radio, but they have got a mobile phone. So with time, we start understanding that we have got almost every year a natural disaster or man-made disaster. It does depend. We have understood that when there is a natural disaster, people move from one place to the other. We have understood from querying the CDRs that the pattern of the population, if there is a drought, they move from one specific point to another point. So as you are aware, census is done in either 5 to 5 years. So we cannot wait 5 years to understand where resources are required in the country. So we start thinking about using the CDR data for good. I mean, getting the data and start using for the good of the population. But we need to create some set of rules to use this data in the sense that we do not analyze one specific person, but we analyze a very big set of the population. While we start doing that, we start understanding that we need partners which know specific issues about analyzing big data and analyzing data and trying to see different use cases that are done in different geographies. We got the CDR data and put in one specific database where we selected specific sets that can be used to analyze almost everything in the country. When I say almost everything, I'm talking about mobility patterns, I'm talking about if there is a natural disaster, how to communicate with people before and after the natural disaster. Apart from that, when we built our database, we started to see in real time what was going on with the country. We had one cyclone, Kenneth, and then we had before Eloise. With all of them, we started understanding how things happen, how much time people take to return to their original places, how our INGD and other institutions, they work to provide relief and help to communities. And we started seeing specific dots appearing more in one specific region based on the natural disaster, the cause and effect of the natural disaster. That's why we decided to create this, the use of big data for disaster management. But not only that, we have been trying to use big data to define where to build roads, where to put hospitals, where to put schools, government facilities that are required for the citizens. Now we have got the capability with this system to start understanding where are Mozambicans highly located in rural and sub-rural areas, how the mobility pattern happens from urban to rural on a daily basis, in trying to understand how many number of buses are required in one specific region or one specific spot based on the mobile phones. Of course, there is a level of accuracy which is not there. I mean, sometimes one person can have 2 mobile phones, so the system will count as 2 persons. So we try to work on that, I mean, refine it as much as possible to be able to give us a very nice understanding. But this came because we had the CDR data before that we were using only for regulatory purposes. But now we have got a very big system that all sets of organizations in the country that are working for the country can easily tap in, connect, and have access to data, which is fully anonymized with a very nice and interesting algorithm that have been created to make sure that, no data of one specific person can be used for something which is not what is legally entitled to be used. Of course, data for good is how we call it, is how we try to move forward to give a real-time understanding of the actual situation of the country. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you very much, David. Now, quick one, I just wanted to understand who were some of the partners that you brought together and worked with on this particular project, and what were their roles?
Yeah, Rachel, this is an interesting question. The way we got partners was amazing. Always there is conferences, there is this, I think it was in South Africa, the first time the conference from ITU World was there. We met this lady called Melissa from DIAL. We started discussing about using big data, weather, and different sets of services. And then we invited her to have a coffee, and she said, I'll set up a meeting with some of our partners and friends. That's how we get to reach to the UNF. And from the UNF, several meetings that we had with DIAL, we managed to reach to FlowMinder. Internally in the country, we already have got INGD and the Institute of National Meteorology, which they deal with weather and natural disasters, which was easier than to bring DIAL, to bring FlowMinder to Mozambique and start sitting and discussing and allocating tasks for each and every one. If you have the system, then comes the most challenging part, which is communicating with communities on the local and local language, which is the essential part of warning somebody that there is a natural disaster coming at their specific location. We designed a system on top of everything, which provides us a way to send IVR and ISMS. So at the top layer, we have got MNOs, all mobile network operators of Mozambique, being a major partner and a major channel to reach to the communities. Well, on the layers below, we have got FlowMinder, which is support us with analyzing the data, real-time data, and making sure that those specific issues which are there of one person having two mobile phones and understanding the entire data set of people which are on a specific region, to be able to communicate with them, knowing the numbers, and also being able to tell the bottom layer, which is INGD and INAM, what relief need to be sent to one specific region if there is a natural disaster. You see, all of these players, they are working together in a chain in a very nice, synchronized way to be able to provide it with information and being able to tell people before the disaster and after the disaster. Of course, we learn some different things with the process, like if there is a natural disaster and the entire infrastructure of telecommunication is damaged, at least we have got prior data to understand how many people have been affected in one specific region, and to be able to mobilize relief and help, knowing at least the average number of people which have been affected based on the prior census, and also with the data that we have before the disaster. This is to say that, from knowing DIAL, we start getting people from the UNF, and then getting to reach to FlowMinder, and also mobilizing people inside the country. At the end of the day, FlowMinder trained staff from the INCM. They can operate the system without needing any support from anybody, unless they want to do additional development. We have got the data pipe which works daily and provides information to the system. We have the capacity to store CDR data for 1 year. Although we understand that one more mobile phone, one more phone call, we need to still growing our infrastructure, but that is the cost of having something that you actually can rely and be able to support the people. Although the system is stored in one single space, we aim to have DR sites around the country in the three regions, center and north of Mozambique, to be able to provide support to the country when there is a major disaster. But this system is not only for weather. Yesterday, I would say the first sample was for weather, but tomorrow we are looking at building different government agencies and entities that need to reach the citizen and being able to send messages and alerts before and after. The IVRs are in local languages and also in Portuguese, but the idea is to be able to specifically speak with you and allow you to have government services at the tip of your hand. Mobile phones, they're widespread in Mozambique and most of African countries, and we have to be able to use the data that's brought from them for good. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salamao David. Really impressive insights there. It really shows the value of the public-private partnerships, because hearing yourself speak, it does appear that this was not just INCM, but INCM as a champion, as a regulatory authority, worked closely with the mobile network operators, technical partners like Flowminder, the Digital Impact Alliance as a convening entity, and of course, the Department of Disaster Management as the ultimate end user of some of these insights. And more importantly, the people of Mozambique, the common people who were being served by these services. And like you said, it's also great to hear of the vision of the INCM and the government of Mozambique to ensure that this initiative is not just for disaster management, but that it can be used across other sectors of development, like in education, in health, in deploying water points and other spaces. So really impressive and encouraging to hear from you, Dr. David. It was a pleasure having you on this session. We hope that other stakeholders and partners within the mobile data for development space have learned a thing or two on how to leverage private-public partnerships like the way you did in building systems that can enhance development and access to services to the people that need the most. Thank you very much, Dr. David.
Thank you, Rachel. It was a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you so much, Rachel. We will now continue the conversation. Just give me a second. So we have heard right now the great efforts from Mozambique. I think what was incredible is it's not just spanning across the ecosystem with multiple different stakeholders, but also across multiple different areas. And within the GSMA, we have also had worked with the support from FCDO and we led COVID-related global efforts. As part of this, we have been learning from those ahead of the curve and shared with those that required support. As you can see on this slide, it has been inspiring to see how engaged the governments were and how supportive were mobile operators, local stakeholders, NGOs, international organizations, etc. With the support of FCDO, we actually worked across 14 different countries in multiple different areas. We covered areas like knowledge sharing, which we heard yesterday over and over again on how important it is. We also supported governments in privacy and ethics questions. And I think where a lot of efforts were laying were in bringing together the public and private sectors and find the right way of collaborations. And of course, in sharing the global insights, and we will share with you a little bit more about this at the very end of the presentation. I think it's even more inspiring when we started looking at how fast was the uptake and the number of questions that were arising and could be addressed with more big data insights. Dr. David already mentioned so many of different use cases, everything from natural disasters to logistics, and within the logistics, where to build roads, where to build hospitals, schools, how to allocate where the buses need to go, etc., and more and more. You can see that on the far left side, there is an increasing complexity of modeling and data tools, and the support that has to go in it grows with it. It goes and spans everything from the population mapping to population mobility, epidemiological modeling, logistics and infrastructure monitoring, and economic modeling. And it's really inspiring, again, to kind of like think back to everything that Dr. David shared with us, is they were actually using most of these areas for mobile big data insights to help them determine certain decisions. On the right side of the slide, there are multiple different use cases. And these use cases showcases where all we have been supporting governments in different countries. And again, you will be able to read more in the report, which we will mention at the very end of this presentation. So finally, where is the success? We all believe, I think everybody on this panel, that the success lies in collaboration. So I think where truly we will manage to be so successful in the past few months in the times of COVID-19 urgency is in bringing local stakeholders together and supporting them additionally with development agencies and NGOs. We have been working very closely with local governments, data experts, health partners, regulators and policymakers, and of course, mobile operators and development agencies and NGOs. And we truly believe that only when you bring all of these stakeholders together, it is when you can actually truly make a difference. So it's not only about collaboration on the high level. I think it's really important that it's collaboration from the very starting point of the product development. It starts by understanding the demand side. It starts by working with the government, with local stakeholders, and understanding what exactly is going to be of most value to themselves. And then, of course, working onwards. So going into the design, co-creating with them, co-shaping all the other use cases that might be interesting. And I think finally, what is of crucial importance is trying to think how can now this knowledge that we brought into the country and that we created together can be replicated in other use cases. And as a GSMA, of course, and mobile industry, data privacy and ethics are always at the core of considerations. We have to create use cases. We have to work with mobile big data in a responsible and trustworthy way. And as sustainability, I like to connect sustainability and replication together. I think it is very important that we create value and incentives that work for all of the stakeholders in the ecosystem, but at the same time that we actually use this knowledge that we create, lessons, and all of the work that we've done also in other areas, in other verticals, for other ministries, for other stakeholders. So we reuse it, replicate it as much as possible. So I'm really delighted now to start this panel conversation with Rachel and Christopher. And I would also like to encourage all of you to pose the questions that you might have into Q&A chat. So even for those that are in the room itself, unfortunately, you will not be able to ask the question itself verbally, but you will actually need to write it in an app. So if you do have any questions for either Christopher, Rachel, or David, please do go ahead. And I have noticed that one question has already come through, and we will cover this at the end of the Q&A or later on at the Q&A session. But for now, over to you, Rachel. So I gave a little bit of introduction to FCDO and the work that we have done together, but can you share a little bit more about your work?
Thank you very much. And just to say as well, I am in Bern. So it would be lovely to, and I have kind of seen some of you already, but unfortunately, just due to this being a virtual session, I'm still only seeing you all on the screen, but I am here in person as well, which is great. So I just want to say hello to everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. But what I've been asked to talk about today was just to share a bit more about what we've been doing in FCDO. So for those that don't know, we've had a strategic partnership with GSMA for, I think it's about 9 years. And that's really been working around the areas of some of the things we've already kind of heard spoken about already. But it's looking, we provided core funding for the Mobile for Development programme, £38 million up to 2024. There's also been a specific programme we've been doing around humanitarian innovation and also one around agricultural technology as well. But what we've been really, through all of those kind of different types of programs, we've been looking at how we can support market-based solutions that actually use mobile technology to actually improve lives. So this really is actually having an impact on the ground. Through all of these programs, we can see the huge potential that mobile phone technology actually has. So far, I think the support that we've been providing has actually supported around 150 different innovations and business models, reaching around 60 million people. But it's also managed to leverage funding from the private sector of around £500 million. But when I'm talking about that all seems very high level. So I just wanted to also share a few very specific examples of what do some of these innovations actually look like? What do they really mean to people? So one of them that we've been working with is a program in Pakistan called Deaf Talk. What that is doing is actually looking to address the needs of around 10 million deaf people in Pakistan, and actually looking at how they can access sign language services, but through mobile phone technology. So it's often difficult for people scattered throughout the country who might be deaf and actually need to have sign language interpretation. It can be very difficult to access that. And what we're doing through this program is to actually help using mobile phones to provide that kind of technology so they're able to kind of access sign language services via their mobile phones. There's another similar program as well operating, which has started in India. Another program that's supported through this is in Nigeria, and it's called Scholar. But in Nigeria, this one in particular is really looking at digital learning, and it's working in the local languages and actually helping to teach people very basic kind of digital skills, but through the mobile phone. So it's helping them to actually learn how do they open an email account, how do they search for different information on Google. And it's also helping people to get access to low-cost mobile phones on a pay-as-you-go basis. One of the other programs operating in Ethiopia is working with small, medium-sized kind of enterprises called Africa 118, and that's actually helping those very small companies to actually get a stronger digital presence. So thinking about, you know, the websites they might have or other kind of digital presence through Facebook or other kind of providers, and actually providing a kind of low-cost solution to help them. And another one is in Zimbabwe called Zone for Energy, and that's providing modular solar energy on a kind of pay-as-you-go basis. So very much, again, linking the solar kind of technology with a kind of mobile solution as a kind of pay-as-you-go. Those are just some of the examples through those big programs. We also do work with Flowminder, who've been mentioned already, I think a couple of times. We have a joint program which we fund alongside the Gates Foundation, and that's been working for a number of years with Columbia Earth Institute, UN, FPA, and also with Flowminder and WorldPop. And what that program's doing specifically is really looking at how you can use satellite imagery alongside other information sources to get really good quality local population estimates that can be then used in a wide variety of different things like planning better health services, delivery of COVID vaccinations, things like that. And that's one of the programs that we've been engaging with for some time now. And in terms of that one in particular, they are using mobile phone data as well to really augment the other information that they're getting. So from local kind of surveys, census data, and satellite imagery, then they're kind of blending it with mobile phone data to actually look at patterns of where people might be moving to and things like that. But I just thought as well it might be useful just to share a bit. I mean, I think that this shows the kind of huge potential, but I think one of the perhaps one of the challenges going forward is as well thinking about, you know, how do you use, when's the right time to use different data sources? So not just kind of automatically assuming necessarily that we would use mobile phone kind of call data records for everything, but it's looking at, you know, when do we actually need to do kind of on the ground, local level kind of population collection for say, census, versus also how we can use call data records, other kind of mobile phone data, other big data sources to kind of augment that as well. So it's not looking at kind of, it's not really trying to, we're not trying to replace necessarily kind of on the ground data collection, but we'll also look at how we're actually augmenting that and how these different technologies can really help in planning. I think that's all I wanted to share at this stage. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Rachel. It was incredible to hear about multiple different services that you're supporting. Maybe just a follow-up question to you. What do you think has been a real change maker in the times of COVID? I think on our side, what we've seen is that specifically on the government side, there was more and more demand for mobile big data and AI services. And I wonder, what do you think are some of the reasons for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think COVID has been a huge kind of game changer, particularly in the world of data. I mean, I think right from the very start of the crisis, we saw a huge thirst for information because this was such a kind of rapidly evolving situation. There was a massive demand for data, such that we've probably never ever seen before. You know, everybody wanted to know exactly you know, from the right at the onset, wanting to know about flight data from Wuhan, you know, how many people were coming from there, where were they going to? And I think very quickly established that they were going everywhere in the world. And it just kind of showed actually the huge data challenge right from the beginning. So I think that COVID definitely kind of, it showed that data was needed, absolutely. I think the second thing it showed actually also though was that there's a huge amount of data there. So, you know, we knew that there was a lot of data around, you know, and I think, you know, we could see there's a whole lot of new data sources that might not have been considered previously. So I think it showed that actually you can use different data sources for different purposes. And I think, you know, the other thing in terms of, you know, what really changed was probably an openness particularly by national statistics offices, I think, to actually be open to using new data sources. You know, whereas I think previously there might have been a bit of reluctance because national statistics offices, you know, I used to work in one, you know, are very used to working with survey data and working with census data where it's all kind of under their control. But actually with COVID, they've had to kind of expand their role to work with new data sources, to work with mobile phone data, but also things like some work we've been doing in the UK on shipping data that actually help to estimate much more quickly the kind of levels of economic activity. So getting faster economic data through using shipping data. So I think all of those have been massive changes. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Rachel. Yeah, it's incredible to hear also about the realization that there are different sources for different requirements, and that they were also then using it, and that also national statistics offices were opening to new sources itself. So over to you, Rachel, for the questions to Christopher.
Thanks, Moita. Christopher, welcome to the session. It's a pleasure to have you here this morning.
Thank you, Rachel, and great to be here. Greetings from Stockholm, pretty much the opposite side of the globe from where you are, Rachel. Pleasure to be here.
Great. So first things first, to start the conversation, Christopher, I was wondering if you could briefly describe the work of Telia in the space of mobile data.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we've been quite active in this space. We started about almost 5 years ago, and we take the anonymous and aggregated location data from our mobile network and produce insights for our customers. So for us, this is actually a commercial area. So we provide these insights to our customers, like the public sector, and also organizations in the private sector. And this is just an example of what it can look like. Here we see one of our offerings. This is a product that municipalities can use to analyze trip and people flow within their municipalities or regions. So here we see just an example of analysis of trips in the Stockholm region. And as it turns out, and as we've heard already, when being able to say something about the total movement in a country, there are actually many applications both in the private and the public sector. And one such area where we've done a lot of work is public transportation, which is a big area in the Nordics. And there's significant investments being made into that area each year, but often still data used to guide these quite substantial investments that impact citizens are based on, I would say, fairly incomplete and untimely data, like travel surveys or specific information on people taking a certain train. So with this type of data, we're able to give a complete picture of the total travel need at any given point in time, which lead to a lot of optimization when this is used in the public sector, better planning, better steering these type of investments. And just briefly also during the pandemic, we've been very proud to provide objective statistics on population movement during the pandemic in the Nordics. So here we see, for example, a public report that we publish weekly. So we've been providing this to the media so that they have objective facts on how people are moving about the country, but also agencies and authorities in the Nordics and Estonia. So that's a very brief view of what we've been up to the last few years.
No, great, quite impressive to see how you're leveraging the use of mobile network operator data. I was just wondering, since the pandemic came through early 2020, have you seen any changes in terms of how public authorities perceive and, more importantly, use this sort of insights?
I can only speak to the Nordics, which is the market that I'm familiar with. And for that, it's a big resounding yes. Before the pandemic, I would say it was not really widely known, at least not in the public sector, that this type of data existed, or it was in such a shape that you can actually make really important decision based on it. And as the pandemic started, 2020, early 2020, we were able to act quite quickly because this was a commercially available product. We reached out to authorities to let them know that this anonymous and aggregated mobility data we think could be very useful for them to evaluate the impact of lockdowns, but also to inform on evidence-based policymaking in a time of crisis where everybody's wanting to do good things, but everybody's running at a very high pace. So getting objective, good, solid data for better decision making, we thought was a good idea. And what we found that for some, this was indeed a very new data set that took a lot of time to actually use. So what has changed is, of course, now that this barrier has been passed, more people than ever, I think, in the public sector know that this data can be useful. And perhaps more importantly, they know how to actually use it. It's one thing to talk about all the promises of using AI and how to apply this data. It's quite a different one to actually use it in your daily processes within your organization. To inform policymaking, for example. And with this now being spread, it's also what I'm really excited about is that it's opened up many new use cases. And one such example that I can also share here, which I'm personally particularly keen on, and that is how to use mobility data to produce insights on carbon emissions from public transportation, or any type of personal transportation for that matter. So here we see an example where we use the mobility data, but we convert it into CO2 emissions, which is so important because it's only when you combine the footprint of a particular trip with the actual amount of trips that are taken that you get the total picture. So you might have a trip that has a very high carbon footprint, but maybe if you don't have a lot of trips on that route, then the total contribution in terms of for the total emission is not particularly large. So here is, I don't think this would have been possible, or there wouldn't have been a willingness to accept that using this type of new data as a proxy for carbon emissions. So I see this as a very positive benefit, side effect from this data now being in the Nordics more well known, and people are feeling more comfortable with it. And that is I think it's a big shift, and for us it means we have to be very proactive talking about this new type of data, but also the methods we have on how do we secure that it's absolute privacy. We live in a GDPR world in Europe, but even without it, we need to make sure that this data is ethically sound, and there are no bad side effects from actually using it, and it needs to be fully privacy secured, and also what we need to do and what we have done and which has helped and has been kind of forced a little bit in this during the pandemic is to do a lot of this in the open so that others can benefit too. And one of the things that would not have happened, I'm sure, is we've actually published a research paper together with the Public Health Agency of Sweden, which we wrote jointly, talking about this collaboration, not so much about the technology in itself, but how did this collaboration come to be, and what are our lessons learned and potential future areas. So in summary, just as digitalization in general has been accelerated, so has also the use of new data sources.
Yeah. No, correct. And I think one takeaway there, Christopher, is that it's important to ensure that such data is used in a safe and responsible way. I'll go to Rachel Bevan before we get into the Q&A, where we also get to hear again from David. Rachel, I just wanted to hear from you after your experience in some of these low income countries, working hand in hand with public sector authorities and other stakeholders. Would you be able to share recommendations on how we can prepare for a stronger future in use of mobile data for development?
Thanks. I'll try and share, and these are some of kind of personal reflections. So, I mean, I think one of the first things is really about understanding each other and understanding where each other's kind of coming from, and that we need to kind of actually appreciate, you know, the kind of the different players and what their kind of different attitudes might be. So kind of just helping to understand, you know, the government and their perspective and why they might need the data, but also from the private sector perspective, understanding, you know, what are the incentives and the drivers behind them actually making data or making analysis available. But I think that also means that we really need to build trust. I mean, a lot of this comes back to trust. And so once we actually trust each other, then it's much easier to kind of work together on these issues. I mean, I think what COVID and some of the other data has shown is it shows the huge potential, but in terms of a recommendation for the future, I mean, I think that what we need to do more of is to actually get some of these kind of one-off kind of pieces of analysis or one-off kind of tools that develop so much more into kind of having sustainable data flows or kind of, you know, analysis that can be repeated regularly. And also tools which can be used and replicated by a whole range of different countries, so that we're not kind of expecting that every single country, every single situation, we have to kind of start from scratch, but actually can we learn from each other, learn and kind of adapt tools. And I know that Flowminder have been doing some of that work already, and I think that will be a really important area going forward. I mean, I think another area is probably also a bit more work that needs to be done on having interoperable data. So just making sure, you know, that we're using the same kind of definitions. That really helps when you're actually kind of looking to combine data sources. So for national statistics offices, it's really important they kind of can understand, you know, what are the different structures to the data, but also make sure that the definitions are kind of the same, or so that they can kind of combine data from a whole range of different sources. And I guess the other thing is as well going forward, I mean, I think where there's a huge benefit and in terms of recommendation, I mean, it's to really look at how we can actually bed these solutions and actually really embed them into policy making, to actually make this use of data so much more routine and actually part of what a policymaker does, and doing it themselves and not necessarily having to kind of do things in a one-off way, but really embedded into the actual policy making processes. I think those are the main things I would say. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Yeah, and I'll actually pick up on some of the points that you raised right now and that you mentioned, and I'll turn them to you, Christopher. And I think some of the things that Rachel mentioned is understanding each other and building trust. And I think from the comment that you were saying before is that at the very beginning, not necessarily the public sector entirely understood how to use small big data, but that actually changed as you went along. Would you be able to share some of the thinking or potentially some of the tips to others on how this happened in the Nordics? How did you manage to build trust, and how did you manage to build a strong understanding of how to use small big data?
Well, it was a lot of hard work to start with. And I think it's so important to not underestimate the challenge of changing someone else's decision process. So that's something you should approach, or we have approached in a quite humble way, and that's a large task. So for us, it was first and foremost, we needed to really ensure that everybody understood how serious we were about privacy. That is like the first, that's the table stakes, but it's also the showstopper. So really being able to explain about how this data is fully privacy secure, and it just wouldn't have been able to even get started without that. And that takes time. That's we have been fully open, transparent, talking about our methods, explaining how we do it, co-writing this paper together with the Public Health Agency of Sweden, talking to media, and really choosing a very transparent method, which perhaps doesn't come fully natural to a private company. So this is something we've done to sort of raise that level of awareness that you feel safe, and that this data is actually safe to use. And then also what I think is important on the public side is that you always need to be treating data as a product, and that's something we also need to explain. And also understand how rich and complex this type of data is, and appreciation of the large effort that is required to produce this, but also how to use it. So this is an area where we need to be very, I think, prescriptive in how you can make certain types of decisions, what kind of error margin, confidence levels, what does it mean? I mean, statistic significance, for example, is important with this type of data. What is that? So a lot of it is around education about the data, and then taking it a step further and also talking about how to use it. And we've seen benefit also as a telecoms operator. We have, for a long while been subject to very tough regulation. We are very used to dealing with very large data sets, sensitive data sets, and doing that in a ethical and legal manner. So that's something we need to talk more about, and as we do that, that also builds trust. So I think what we have found jointly is that we have strengths as a telecom operator that also makes it, drives that kind of trust from also the public sector. So many things that I think drive why authorities have seen us as a trusted party, but I think really it's highlighting transparency being the most important one, and be very open that it's hard to change your decision process. Just because you have an amazing set of data doesn't mean that someone automatically is going to change how they work.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much on this. And David, actually, I'll come to you now, because I think certain things that Rachel said and certain things that Christopher then commented also quite nicely tied into a question for you. So I think on one hand, given so much work that you're doing with mobile big data and with so many different stakeholders, I would like to ask you about building trust and how have you managed to create this? Because I would think that you have managed to create this perfectly, given that you have a broad range of activities where you're supporting decision making. And you will need to unmute yourself, sorry.
Thank you. Trust is a main issue when you're working with data. The way we did to attain trust from every stakeholder was mainly adopting co-design, where you bring a set of people from the community. They're gonna be the people from where the data comes from the industry, and apply something similar to a participatory action research or co-design, where you bring everybody to the set of a table, and we started discussing approaches on how to collect data, how we're gonna use it, and explain to everybody how everything gonna be done. Everybody have got an equal voice, an equal opinion, and all opinions should be taken in consideration. It doesn't matter if it is opinion of somebody who does not know science or does not know big data, or he just works with computers and servers. We take everybody in consideration. If you have from this group a set of ideas and perspectives, and they are put into paper and they are put into practice, it's much more easier to attain trust from everybody within the scope of the project. Going back to the communities, basically is a set of consultation sessions that you have done in different geographic locations from the country for you to attain the general idea from the entire set of the population. Although you will having only a sample of the population, that's good to attain trust from everybody within the country. But there comes a question, being the person or the unit in charge of the project, you need to be open to come back to them and say, guys, I've done a mistake. The algorithm is not so good. It's not safe. We need to refine it. These are the problems. These are the constraints. We need to do A, B, and C. You yourself need to be transparent. That's point number one. You shouldn't be afraid of saying, I've done a mistake. You should be open about it, and should be open about the things that you want to do to be able to mitigate the mistakes that you have done in the past. You need to show them commitment that you're trying to do the best that you can to make sure that the system and the data is safe. I mean, while we do not have a GDPR in Mozambique, we say to everybody that we are still following GDPR rules, and we explain them how they are supposed to be done and what is the GDPR. Although they might not understand, they will rely you as an expert who can tell them that I have done a mistake. If an expert come and say I've done a mistake, for the community within my country and the groups that we work with, it's much more humble and receptive than you have done a mistake and you don't say to anybody. This is how we attain trust from everybody within the group that we have been working, by telling them that we are also learning from this process. It's not something that we are experts and we know everything about it. So we are following like a co-design approach where we go and reformulate every single process that we are having and try to get better than yesterday. That's how we are doing it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, David. And I'm actually going through questions now that were posted on the app itself. There are quite a lot of very interesting questions. I apologize upfront that we will not be able to respond to all of them. But one question that ties a little bit with certain aspects that we covered already is around CDR. And I don't know whether David or Christopher, one of the two of you could respond to this, but essentially it's around the data flow, real-time data flow. David, you specifically mentioned that. I would be very keen to hear how it is in Mozambique. And then Christopher, over to you, maybe to also hear your comment. David?
Yeah, data flow is a challenge. It's a challenge. I mean, this was the first stage of negotiation with MNOs. We decided we want to have all the CDRs flowing to our servers, and we get the CDRs, we anonymize them, and then we stash them in one specific server. But remember, sometimes we have data missing for 1-2 hours, even at some points 1 day, either for network constraints, either for I mean, different issues that might appear. But you, like I told you before, you need to start solving these problems one at a time and make sure that the data pipe is actually working precisely. It is something that until today, we still monitor every single day that to understand if you are getting the data from each and every MNO, but it flows. As of now, we might be having, I would say, margin of error of 90%. Maybe it's only one MNO that we still need to figure it out why sometimes the data pipe stops flowing. Apart from that, I mean, all is well, all is fine. The way we try to understand if the data pipe is flowing pretty much well is mainly on the off-net codes. We try to compare the off-net data with the off-net codes with the off-net balance that each MNO have to pay to the other one. So we look at the regulation to make sure that everything within the pipe and the number of amount of minutes, they ring on the same bell. If that's okay every single month, I mean, everything is flowing correctly. But if there is a difference in terms of, let's say, they're missing something like 20 to 100 minutes, means one day the data did not flow properly. So we have to try to find which day and go to the MNO and ask him to push that data from that specific date again, which is a lot of work, but I mean, that's how it has to be done. Some moment you need to stop and evaluate the amount of data you're having. The only one way we have to do that is looking at the off-net codes and on-net codes and make sure that the minutes that each and MNO have said that it's the minutes they got in a month also resonates to what we are having in our data pipe. I mean, we are not yet measuring the data pipe, like the amount of CDR data that comes from the data or from the movement. But as of now, that's the only one way we have to measure if everything is correct or not. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
So I think the question was on real-time data. So It's quite easy answer. We do not do real-time data with the full country population movement, mostly for ethical reasons. It's also legally, we feel that you risk the anonymization aspect when you deal with real-time data, but also ethically, there are many risks and potential misuse side effects by knowing exactly how much people are in particular areas in real time. So in our case, our data is 24 to 48 hours, 24 to 48 hours delayed.
Okay, thank you so much, Christopher. And I will actually connect a little bit this response to the next question. And Rachel, maybe this is to you, but essentially it's on regulatory constraints and limitations in using more big data. And I thought that potentially you can respond actually from your previous position. I believe you mentioned that you used to work as part of the National Statistics Office. I don't know if from any of the two positions you would be able to share some of the comments. How you see regulatory constraints in mobile big data?
Not sure I'm not sure much I could really kind of add on the regulatory constraints. I mean, I think apart from, I do believe that that's also about, what's happening at the moment. The market is changing so quickly, technology is changing so quickly that regulation is taking quite a long time to kind of catch up. I think that's where we also need to really kind of build that element of trust so that we're actually looking at that together. And I also think it's much more than just regulation. I think what we have seen already is that countries may have identical regulation, but they apply it very differently. So I think regulation is really only part of it. And actually, it's also, how you actually apply that. And I think that's also, again, is that area around, regulation is taking a long time to catch up. Therefore, I think it's important that we do come back to some of those issues, as Christopher was mentioning as well, around kind of ethics. It's extremely important, and privacy. But I would also say as well, that's, again, I think the opportunity of new tools that can really help us on some of those things as well. I saw earlier you had the logo for OPAL, the Open Algorithms kind of group. And I think some of the work they're doing around, actually, you don't necessarily need to make, kind of aggregate call data records available to researchers. Rather than doing that, you can actually run an algorithm within the, a mobile operator, run an algorithm and then make the results of the analysis available. So I think we can use things like that, use the technology to help us a bit more on the regulation. But I think also being really mindful that regulations, there are a lot of different regulations that are kind of being affected when we talk about this. It's not just the regulation around the telecoms industry, it's around statistical legislation. You're saying GDPR, also AI regulation, the new, I think it's the EU AI regulation as well, and all those things. And they all work very much together. Thanks.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much, Rachel. And Christopher, I would actually like to ask you one final question, which I think is really important, and it's from the Q&A here. And it's essentially, we touched a little bit on how you managed to increase the understanding of the public sector about more big data. And specifically here, question is about the importance of education. And what kind of tools or strategies did you use in getting across the technical knowledge to non-technical decision makers? Were these courses, visualizations, any thorough explanations or other methods that you supported? And I think this is also a question I think that most of us are having, because all of us are working in the space of capacity building quite strongly, and it would be interesting to hear your comments on this.
So that's a super relevant question, and that to me is a really hard thing to solve. There's lots of technical challenges and data quality, and there's a big investment made there, but that's doable. This is the hard part, because this is dealing with other people and their decision processes. So we start that by looking at data as a product. So we never just ship data. We always look at what are the specific problems, specific decisions that need to be made, and then we try to shape our data into different products as much as possible. So we start there by always trying to come with an answer to a specific problem someone has. coming just with data, then you may be answering things where there is no problem. So it starts by that. We shape our data always as products, as answers to specific questions that decision makers have. Then we spend a lot of time and effort on the education part. We hold webinars, user groups, where we connect our decision makers. For example, we have regular meetings where all our municipality customers are sharing their experiences of how to use this and their learnings. We do training videos. We invite customers to talk about how they've used our data. We are, doing a lot of sort of outreach work. So it's as any sort of complex product. You need to think about the user manual, and even before then, you need to think about how you shape the product. I mean, the iPhone was quite successful because it was solving some real problems. So that's where you need to start, and then you just really need to talk a lot about how to actually use it.
Yeah, perfect comment. I think there is no easy way out, and I think there are multiple different ways in which you need to address this. And unfortunately, we have come to the end of the session. So I would actually like to thank everybody in attendance, thank my panelists, thank you on an incredible conversation. And maybe just before I close down, I'll take another minute to share multiple different resources that are out there. And Rachel actually shared quite a lot of things that Dial has already mentioned. So I would invite you again to go to their website. And then in addition to this, there is also, I mentioned report on multiple occasions, the GSMA one that was funded by the FCDO, where you can find so many different things, everything from like interactive highlights to different webinars. You can read about lessons learned, use cases, listen to in-country interviews, etc., etc. And then GSMA also has a digital toolkit, which you'll find the link at the very bottom. And you can also find there specific areas that might be of your interest, and you can find then further information on it. And like one of the areas that we think, and that I mentioned just now, it's crucially important, is capacity building for policymakers and regulators. There is just so much that still can happen on that point. And on the GSMA side, we actually do offer free mobile policy training, and you can find more information on the link that is provided. And two relevant courses that I would specifically mention are on principles of mobile privacy and on big data analytics and artificial intelligence. So I would invite you to go there. And then one of the things that I think Christopher briefly mentioned is on the Cambridge University Press articles, which is an entire collection of peer-reviewed open access articles that are showcasing experience from around the globe, from how telco and governments work together. And it's examining both the potential of mobile data as also the challenges that we're facing in these times, and how these tools can be incorporated and how they can inform the government decision making. And I think what is incredible is that, again, it spans across multiple different stakeholders and covers a wide range of geographies. So this is quite a lot of resources. I think there is quite a lot of things. I do really hope that we have give you some pointers on market shaping. There is going to be even more in all of these reports that we mentioned. And further, do reach out to ourselves, either through the app itself or on LinkedIn and other platforms that we have provided. And we'll be more than happy to respond to other questions. So thank you again to everyone. Have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.